A poor little boy approaches a CEO and shyly offers to shine his shoes in exchange for a few coins. Touched by the boy's sad eyes and dirty clothes, the CEO agrees. After finishing, the boy smiles and says he'll use the money to help his sick mother. Curious, the CEO follows him to a hospital and learns the boy's mother was once his teenage girlfriend, and the boy is his own son. Shocked and emotional, he takes them both in, marries her, and makes her the head of his company. The autumn rain had just stopped when Michael Harrison stepped out of his black Tesla in front of Manhattan's most exclusive business district, his handmade Italian leather shoes clicking against the wet pavement as he strode toward the towering glass building that housed Harrison Industries. At 38, Michael had built a technology empire worth over $2 billion, transforming from a scholarship kid from Brooklyn into one of the youngest CEOs on the Fortune 500 list. His tailored navy suit and platinum watch spoke of success earned through relentless ambition and 18-hour workdays that had cost him everything else that once mattered. As Michael approached the gleaming entrance to his 40-story headquarters, a small voice interrupted his morning routine of checking stock prices and reviewing meeting agendas on his phone. "Excuse me, mister, could I shine your shoes for you?" Michael looked down to see a boy who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. With dark hair that needed cutting and clothes that had seen too many washings, the child was kneeling beside a makeshift shoe-shine kit, a wooden box that looked homemade with bottles of polish that were nearly empty and rags that had been used until they were threadbare. His small hands were already stained with black polish, and his face carried the kind of hopeful desperation that broke hearts and built empathy in anyone who still possessed it. "Please, sir," the boy continued, his voice carrying a maturity that seemed impossible for someone so young. "I do really good work, and I only charge $5. My mum taught me how to make shoes look brand new." Michael's first instinct was to politely decline and continue his rushed morning routine. He had a board meeting in 20 minutes, 3 conference calls with international clients, and a merger negotiation that could make or break the quarter's earnings. But something about the boy's earnest brown eyes and the careful way he had arranged his humble supplies made Michael pause. The child was clearly poor. His sneakers had holes that had been covered with duct tape. His jeans were too short for his growing frame, and his t-shirt was clean but faded from countless washings. Yet there was dignity in the way he knelt beside his shoe-shine kit, pride in his offer to provide a service, and a work ethic that reminded Michael of his own childhood when he'd sold newspapers on street corners to help his single mother pay rent. "What's your name, son?" Michael asked, setting down his briefcase and really looking at the boy for the first time. "Tommy Rodriguez, sir. I'm 8 years old, and I've been shining shoes for 2 months now. I can make yours look better than new, I promise." Something in Tommy's determined expression reminded Michael of himself at that age, hungry for opportunity, willing to work for every dollar, and carrying responsibilities that most children never had to consider. Michael glanced at his Rolex, calculating the time he could spare, then surprised himself by sitting down on the bench beside Tommy's setup. "All right, Tommy Rodriguez, show me what you can do." Udil, Tommy's face lit up with a smile so bright it could have powered the streetlights. He immediately got to work with the focused intensity of a master craftsman, carefully removing every speck of dirt from Michael's expensive shoes before applying polish with precise circular motions that spoke of countless hours of practice. "My mom says that when you do good work, people remember you," Tommy explained as he worked, his small hands moving with surprising skill. "She says that even small jobs are important if you do them with pride." Michael watched this child, this boy who couldn't afford decent clothes but spoke about work ethic with the wisdom of someone decades older, and felt something shift inside his chest. When had he last thought about pride in work rather than just profit margins? When had he last considered the dignity of honest labor instead of just the quarterly earnings reports? "Your mum sounds like a smart woman," Michael said softly. "She's the smartest person in the whole world," Tommy replied without hesitation, his eyes never leaving his work. "And the strongest too. She takes care of me all by herself. And she never complains, even when things are really hard." Tommy worked on Michael's shoes with the concentration of a surgeon performing delicate operation, his small tongue poking out slightly as he focused on getting every detail perfect. The transformation was remarkable. What had been merely expensive leather became mirror-bright perfection that reflected the morning sunlight like polished obsidian. "There," Tommy announced with obvious pride, sitting back on his heels to admire his handiwork. "What do you think, Mr. Harrison, Michael Harrison, and Tommy? These look absolutely incredible. I don't think they've ever looked this good, even when they were brand new." Michael examined his shoes with genuine amazement. The boy had talent that went far beyond his years, attention to detail that would have impressed the most demanding executive. Tommy beamed with satisfaction as he carefully packed his supplies back into the wooden box that Michael now noticed was hand-painted with small flowers and stars, clearly decorated by someone who loved this child enough to make even his work tools beautiful. "That'll be $5, Mr. Harrison," Tommy said, holding out his small hand with the professional dignity of someone conducting serious business. Michael reached into his wallet, but instead of pulling out a $5 bill, he handed Tommy a crisp $50 bill. Tommy's eyes went wide as he stared at the money, his mouth falling open in shock. "Mr. Harrison, this is too much. I only charge $5, and I can't make change for something this big." "You don't need to make change, son. That's all for you. You did exceptional work, and exceptional work deserves exceptional payment." Michael stood, gathering his briefcase and feeling oddly reluctant to end this encounter. "What are you going to do with your earnings today?" Tommy looked down at the $50 bill as if it were made of pure gold, his hands trembling slightly as he held it. "I'm going to take it to my mom. She's not feeling very well right now, and maybe this will make her smile." More, the simple honesty in Tommy's voice hit Michael like a physical blow. This child wasn't thinking about toys or candy or any of the things 8-year-olds typically wanted. His first thought was bringing joy to his mother, sharing his success with the person who mattered most to him. "Your mom is lucky to have such a thoughtful son," Michael said, his voice carrying more emotion than he'd intended. "I'm the lucky one," Tommy replied, with the certainty of someone stating an absolute truth. "She works really hard to take care of me, even when she doesn't feel good. The least I can do is help her when I can." As Michael walked toward his office building, he found himself turning back to watch Tommy carefully pack his shoeshine kit, count his money one more time with obvious delight, and then head down the street with a spring in his step that spoke of pure joy. There was something about this encounter that felt significant, important, in a way that Michael couldn't quite define. Instead of immediately entering his building, Michael made an impulsive decision that would have shocked his board of directors. He followed Tommy at a distance, curious about this remarkable child and the mother who had raised him to be so hard-working and selfless at such a young age. Tommy walked 12 blocks through neighborhoods that grew progressively less affluent, his small figure navigating busy intersections and crowded sidewalks with the confidence of someone who had made this journey many times before. Michael stayed far enough behind to avoid being noticed, but close enough to ensure Tommy's safety as the boy made his way through parts of the city that most people like Michael never saw. The destination was St. Mary's Hospital, a public medical facility that served the city's most vulnerable populations. Michael watched from across the street as Tommy approached the information desk, spoke briefly with the receptionist, and then hurried toward the elevator with his precious $50 clutched tightly in his small fist. Something cold and heavy settled in Michael's stomach as he realized that Tommy's mother wasn't just not feeling well. She was hospitalized, and from the look of the building and the neighborhood, it wasn't because she could afford the best medical care available. This child, this 8-year-old boy, who shined shoes with the dedication of a master craftsman, was trying to support his sick mother with whatever money he could earn on the streets of Manhattan. The weight of that responsibility, the love and determination it represented, made Michael feel simultaneously humbled and heartbroken. As Tommy disappeared into the elevator, Michael made another decision that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. He was going to find out more about Tommy Rodriguez and his mother, and if they needed help, he was going to provide it. After all, he'd built his fortune by recognizing valuable investments, and he'd never encountered anything more valuable than a child who understood the meaning of family, loyalty, and hard work before most kids learned to tie their shoes. Michael spent the next 2 hours making phone calls that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings or international mergers. Using the resources available to someone of his wealth and influence, he quickly learned disturbing facts about Tommy Rodriguez's family situation that made his morning encounter take on devastating new meaning. Sarah Rodriguez, age 35, had been admitted to St. Mary's Hospital 3 weeks earlier with advanced stage cancer that had gone undiagnosed for months because she couldn't afford regular medical care. She was a single mother who'd been working 2 jobs, cleaning office buildings at night and stocking shelves at a grocery store during the day, until the illness made it impossible for her to continue working. But the information that hit Michael like a lightning bolt was buried in the hospital's patient records. Sarah Rodriguez had listed her previous address as Brooklyn, with a notation that she had grown up in the same neighborhood where Michael had spent his childhood. A neighborhood he'd left behind 17 years ago when he'd received a full scholarship to MIT, leaving behind everyone and everything that had tied him to his past. The name Sarah Rodriguez hadn't immediately triggered recognition, but as Michael stared at the photograph in the hospital database, a woman with dark hair and familiar brown eyes. Even pale and sick, she was unmistakably beautiful. Memories came flooding back with the force of a tsunami. Sarah Rodriguez had been Sarah Mendoza when he knew her. She'd been 18 when he was 21, the girl who worked at the corner bodega where he bought coffee every morning before his computer programming classes. She'd been smart, funny and kind, with dreams of becoming a teacher and a smile that could light up the darkest Brooklyn morning. They'd dated for 8 months during his senior year, and Michael remembered it as the last time he'd been truly happy, rather than just successful. Sarah had believed in his dreams when he'd had nothing but ambition and student loans. She'd studied with him in the library, brought him sandwiches when he was too broke to buy lunch, and listened to his plans for building a technology company with the faith of someone who saw greatness in him before he'd achieved anything worth recognizing. But when MIT had offered him a graduate program and a research position that would launch his career, Michael had made a choice that had haunted him for 17 years. He'd broken up with Sarah, convinced that a serious relationship would hold him back from the success he was determined to achieve. He'd told himself it was better for both of them, that she deserved someone who could give her stability rather than the uncertainty of entrepreneurial dreams. He'd left Brooklyn, thrown himself into building his company, and deliberately avoided any contact with his past. In 17 years, he'd never returned to the neighborhood where he'd grown up, never looked back at the life he'd abandoned in pursuit of wealth and achievement. Now, staring at Sarah's hospital records, Michael realized the devastating mathematics of timing. Sarah's son, Tommy, was 8 years old. The dates aligned perfectly with when Michael had left Brooklyn, when he'd walked away from the only woman he'd ever truly loved, because he'd been too focused on his ambitions to recognize what really mattered. Tommy Rodriguez wasn't just a remarkable child who had impressed Michael with his work ethic and character. Tommy Rodriguez was his son. The boy with Sarah's brown eyes and Michael's determination to succeed against all odds. The child who had inherited Sarah's kindness and Michael's business instincts. The son Michael had never known existed because he'd been too successful, too busy, too focused on building an empire to notice that he'd left behind the most important parts of himself. Michael sat in his executive office, surrounded by awards and photographs of business achievements, and realized that all his success meant nothing compared to what he'd lost. Somewhere in Manhattan, his son was shining shoes to help his dying mother, while Michael had spent 17 years accumulating wealth that felt hollow and meaningless in the face of this revelation. But perhaps it wasn't too late. Perhaps redemption was still possible for a man who had everything except the family he'd abandoned before he'd even known it existed. Michael Harrison was about to learn whether love could survive 17 years of separation, whether forgiveness was possible for abandonment, and whether a father could earn the right to be part of his son's life after missing the first 8 years of it. By the time Michael arrived at St. Mary's Hospital that afternoon, visiting hours were nearly over, and the corridors were filled with the quiet desperation that permeated public medical facilities. Families holding vigils they couldn't afford, children trying to understand why their parents were suddenly fragile, and the omnipresent reality that good medical care was a luxury many couldn't access. Michael found room 314 after navigating hallways that smelled of disinfectant and broken dreams. Through the partially open door, he could see Tommy sitting beside a hospital bed, carefully counting the $50 Michael had given him and arranging the bills in neat stacks on the blanket. In the bed lay a woman Michael would have recognized anywhere, despite the 17 years and the illness that had stolen her color and vitality. Sarah Rodriguez, Sarah Mendoza from his memories, looked fragile and exhausted. But her eyes still held the same intelligence and warmth that had captivated him when they were both young and full of impossible dreams. She was thin now, her beautiful dark hair covered by a hospital scarf. But when she smiled at Tommy's excitement about his earnings, Michael saw the girl who had believed in him when he'd had nothing to offer but hope and determination. "Mama, look," Tommy was saying, his voice bright with excitement. "I made $50 today. A really nice businessman gave me this much for shining his shoes. Now you can get the good pudding from the cafeteria. And maybe we can buy you some of those magazines you like." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she pulled Tommy close for a gentle hug. "Mijo, this is wonderful, but I want you to keep some of this money for yourself. Maybe buy some new school supplies or those sneakers you need." "I don't need anything, Mama. I just want you to get better." Tommy's voice carried the fierce loyalty of a child who had been forced to grow up too fast. "The doctor said you need to eat more to get strong, and now we can buy you all the good food you want." Michael stood frozen in the doorway, watching the interaction between his son and the woman he'd once loved. Feeling like an intruder in a moment of intimate family connection. The guilt was overwhelming. While he'd been building his fortune, Sarah had been raising their child alone, working multiple jobs to provide for Tommy while battling an illness that could have been treated if she'd had access to better health care. Sarah looked up and saw Michael standing in the doorway, and the recognition in her eyes was immediate and complex. Surprise, pain, confusion, and something that might have been relief, all flickering across her face in the span of a heartbeat. "Michael." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Tommy turned to look at the stranger in the doorway, and Michael saw his own features reflected in the boy's face. The same stubborn jawline, the same intense brown eyes, the same expression of focused determination that had driven Michael to build his empire. "Tommy," Sarah said carefully, her voice steady, despite the obvious shock of seeing Michael after 17 years. "This is an old friend of mine from when I was younger. Michael, this is my son, Tommy." Michael stepped into the room, his heart hammering as he looked at the child who was undeniably his son. "Hello, Tommy. I believe we met this morning. You did excellent work on my shoes." Tommy's face lit up with recognition. "Mr. Harrison, you're the nice businessman who gave me the $50. Mama, this is the man I told you about, the one who appreciated my work." Sarah's eyes widened as she processed this information. The man who had given their son such generous payment, who had shown kindness to a child shining shoes on the street, was the same Michael Harrison who had walked out of her life 17 years ago without knowing she was carrying his child. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Michael asked Sarah, his voice gentle but urgent. Sarah nodded, then turned to Tommy. "Mijo, could you go to the cafeteria and get me some of that good pudding you mentioned? Take your time and maybe get something for yourself too." After Tommy left with obvious excitement about his shopping mission, Sarah and Michael were alone for the first time in 17 years. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of all the words that had never been spoken, all the years that had passed, and the devastating reality of what Michael was finally beginning to understand. "He's mine, isn't he?" Michael said quietly, the words feeling strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I found out I was pregnant 2 weeks after you left for MIT. I tried to call you, but your number was disconnected. I wrote letters to the university, but they came back undelivered. You disappeared completely, and I didn't know how to find you." "Sarah, I'm so sorry. If I had known, would it have mattered?" Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying 17 years of pain and exhaustion. "You made it clear that your career was more important than anything else. You said a relationship would hold you back from achieving your dreams." Michael felt each word like a knife to his heart, because they were true. At 21, he'd been so focused on success that he'd convinced himself love was a distraction he couldn't afford. Now, at 38, he realized that all his achievements meant nothing without the family he'd never known existed. "You're right," Michael said simply. "I was young and stupid and so focused on building a career that I threw away the most important thing in my life. But Sarah, I'm here now. I want to help. I want to be part of Tommy's life, if you'll let me." "It's too late for that," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm dying, Michael. Stage 4 cancer. The doctors say I have weeks. Maybe a month if I'm lucky. After I'm gone, Tommy will have no one." The words hit Michael like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making the sterile hospital room spin around him. Sarah was dying. His son, his 8-year-old son, who had spent the morning shining shoes to help his mother, was about to become an orphan with no one to care for him. "There has to be something we can do," Michael said desperately, his mind already racing through the possibilities that unlimited financial resources could provide. The best doctors, experimental treatments, specialists from anywhere in the world. "I've already looked into all of that," Sarah interrupted gently. "The cancer has spread too far. Money can't fix everything, Michael, even your money." Michael sank into the uncomfortable hospital chair beside Sarah's bed, feeling the weight of 17 years of missed opportunities crushing down on him. While he'd been accumulating wealth and building his business empire, his son had been growing up without a father, and the woman he'd once loved had been battling illness alone. "What happens to Tommy when?" Michael couldn't finish the sentence. "Social services," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had already faced the worst possibilities. "There's no family. My parents died when Tommy was 3, and I was an only child. He'll go into the foster care system." The thought of Tommy, bright, hard-working, loving Tommy. Being shuffled through foster homes and group facilities made Michael feel physically sick. This child who carried himself with such dignity, who worked to help his mother with the dedication of someone twice his age, deserved so much more than the uncertain future that awaited him. "No," Michael said firmly, "absolutely not. I won't let that happen." "Michael, you can't just decide to be a father after 8 years," Sarah replied. But there was something in her voice, hope, maybe, or desperation, that suggested she wanted him to prove her wrong. "Why not? He's my son. I should have been there from the beginning, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, and I want to take care of him. I want to give him everything he should have had all along." Sarah studied Michael's face, searching for something. Sincerity, perhaps, or the kind of commitment that could survive the challenges of sudden parenthood. "He doesn't know you're his father. Then we'll tell him together." And what happens when you get tired of playing dad? When the reality of raising a child interferes with your business empire? When Tommy needs you at school, plays and soccer games instead of board meetings? Michael reached out and took Sarah's hand. Feeling how fragile she'd become, but also sensing the strength that had carried her through 8 years of single motherhood. "Sarah, I know I don't deserve your trust. I know I failed you 17 years ago in the worst possible way, but I'm not the same person I was then. Success doesn't mean anything if you have no one to share it with." He's not a project, Michael. He's not a business acquisition or a charitable cause. He's a little boy who's about to lose the only parent he's ever known. "I know that, and I know I have no right to ask this, but please, give me a chance to be the father he deserves. Let me prove that I can put him first, always." Sarah closed her eyes. Exhaustion and medication making it difficult for her to focus, but Michael could see her mind working through the impossible calculus of a dying mother trying to secure her child's future. "He loves to read," she said suddenly. "Science books, adventure stories, anything he can get his hands on. And he's brilliant with numbers. He can calculate tips and discounts in his head faster than most adults. He wants to be an engineer like you, even though he doesn't know you're his father." Michael felt tears threatening as he listened to Sarah describe the son he'd missed knowing for 8 years. "Tell me everything. I want to know everything about him. He's never had a birthday party with other kids because we couldn't afford it. He's never been to an amusement park or a baseball game. He's never had a Christmas tree because our apartments were always too small. But he never complains, never asks for things he knows we can't afford." Each detail was another knife to Michael's heart, another reminder of all the experiences his son had missed because Michael had been too selfish and ambitious to stay in Brooklyn. But they were also promises of all the experiences he could still give Tommy, all the love and opportunities that were still possible. "I want to make up for all of that," Michael said. "I want to give him the childhood he should have had, the education he deserves, the security of knowing he's loved and protected." Sarah opened her eyes and looked directly at Michael. "If I let you do this, if I let you be his father, you have to promise me something. You have to promise that you'll love him not because he's your son, but because of who he is. Tommy is special, Michael. He's kind and hard-working and wise beyond his years. Don't try to change him into some version of who you think he should be." "I promise," Michael said without hesitation. "I already love who he is. This morning, watching him work, listening to him talk about you, I've never met anyone with more character or determination." Tommy's voice in the hallway interrupted their conversation, and Sarah quickly wiped her tears. When their son entered the room, carrying pudding cups and a magazine about space exploration, he was beaming with the satisfaction of someone who had accomplished an important mission. "I got vanilla and chocolate pudding, and the lady at the register said this magazine was about rocket ships, so I thought you might like it," Tommy announced, carefully arranging his purchases on the hospital table. Michael watched this extraordinary child taking care of his mother with such love and attention, and felt his heart breaking and healing simultaneously. In a few minutes, they would tell Tommy the truth about who Michael was. In a few weeks, Tommy would lose his mother and gain a father he'd never known existed. But looking at this remarkable boy, his son, Michael felt something he'd never experienced in all his years of business success. The absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, with the people who mattered most. The conversation that would change 3 lives forever began with Tommy innocently asking why the nice businessman from the morning was visiting his mother in the hospital. Sarah and Michael exchanged glances across the small room, both understanding that there was no way to ease into a revelation of this magnitude. "Tommy, come sit with me," Sarah said gently, patting the hospital bed beside her. "Mr. Harrison and I need to tell you something very important." Tommy climbed up beside his mother with the cautious expression of a child who had learned that important conversations often meant bad news. His eyes moved between Sarah and Michael could see intelligence and wariness in those familiar brown eyes. "Remember how I've told you that your father was a good man who had to go away before you were born?" Sarah began, her voice steady, despite the tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "You said he didn't know about me, and that he would have stayed if he did." Tommy replied, reciting the story Sarah had carefully crafted to protect his feelings about his absent father. "That's right, mijo. Well, sometimes life brings people back together in ways we never expect." Sarah took Tommy's small hand in hers, then reached out for Michael's hand as well. "Tommy, this is your father. Michael is your daddy." Tommy's eyes went wide as he looked between his mother and Michael, his young mind working to process information that seemed impossible. But you're the man from this morning, the one who paid me for shining your shoes." "Yes," Michael said softly, moving closer to the bed. "I am. And Tommy, when I saw you this morning, how hard you were working, how much you love your mother, how polite and smart you are, I felt proud in a way I'd never felt before. I just didn't understand why, until now." "You're really my dad?" Tommy's voice was small, uncertain, carrying the hope and fear of a child who had dreamed of this moment but never dared to believe it could really happen. "I really am," Michael confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "And I know this is confusing and scary, but I want you to know that I'm here now, and I'm never going away again." Tommy was quiet for a long moment, his 8-year-old mind working through implications that most children never had to consider. Finally, he looked up at his mother with the serious expression that had made him seem so mature that morning. "Mama, does this mean you won't have to worry about what happens to me when you—" Tommy's voice trailed off, but the question was clear. Sarah's tears came freely now as she pulled Tommy close. "That's exactly what it means, baby. It means you'll have someone who loves you to take care of you always." "But I don't want you to leave," Tommy whispered, burying his face against his mother's shoulder. "I want you to get better so we can all be a family together." Michael felt his heart shatter as he watched his son struggle with the reality of losing his mother while simultaneously gaining the father he'd never known. The complexity of emotions, grief, hope, fear, love, was overwhelming for an adult, let alone an 8-year-old child. "Tommy," Michael said gently, "I know this is a lot to understand all at once. I know you're scared about your mum, and I know having a new dad probably feels strange, but I want you to know that I'm going to take care of you no matter what happens. You'll never have to worry about having a home or food or anything you need." Tommy lifted his head and looked at Michael with those serious brown eyes. "Will I still be able to shine shoes if I want to? I'm really good at it, and I like working." The question was so innocent, so characteristic of this remarkable child who found pride in honest work, that Michael had to swallow hard before he could answer. You can do whatever makes you happy, Tommy, but you'll never have to work to help pay for things you need. You're a kid, and kids should get to be kids. What if I want to help people, though? Like, what if I want to work because it makes me feel good? Michael looked at Sarah and saw her smiling through her tears. This was the child she had raised, someone who understood that work and helping others brought dignity and purpose, not just money. Then we'll find ways for you to help people, Michael promised. There are lots of ways to make the world better, and I think you're going to be amazing at whatever you choose to do. Tommy nodded solemnly, then surprised both adults by reaching out and taking Michael's hand. His small fingers were still stained with shoe polish from the morning's work, but his grip was firm and trusting. "Can I still call you Mr. Harrison until I get used to you being my dad?" Tommy asked with the careful politeness that had impressed Michael that morning. "You can call me whatever feels comfortable," Michael replied, squeezing Tommy's hand gently. "We have plenty of time to figure everything out together." As the three of them sat together in the hospital room, a family newly formed by revelation and circumstance, Michael understood that his life had just divided into two parts: everything that had happened before this moment and everything that would happen after. The before seemed hollow and meaningless in comparison to the profound responsibility and love he felt looking at his son. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of legally claiming Tommy as his child. He would arrange for the best possible care for Sarah, even knowing it might not be enough. He would start learning how to be a father to a remarkable boy who'd already taught him more about character and love in one day than he'd learned in 38 years of pursuing success. But tonight, he simply sat with his family, marveling at the miracle that had brought them together and promising himself that he would spend the rest of his life proving worthy of the trust he saw in his son's eyes. 2 weeks after the revelation that changed everything, Michael Harrison found himself transforming from a ruthless CEO who lived for quarterly earnings into a man whose entire world revolved around hospital visiting hours and his son's daily routines. He had moved into a suite at the Marriott across from St. Mary's Hospital, abandoning his penthouse apartment to be closer to Sarah and Tommy during what everyone knew would be Sarah's final weeks. Every morning, Michael arrived at the hospital with fresh flowers, magazines, and whatever comfort items Sarah mentioned wanting. But more importantly, he came to learn about the son he'd missed knowing for 8 years. Sarah had become his teacher in the most important subject of his life, understanding Tommy Rodriguez, soon to be Tommy Harrison. "He has nightmares sometimes," Sarah explained during one of their quiet conversations while Tommy was at the hospital's children's activity center. "About me dying, about being alone. He tries to be brave. But he's still just a little boy carrying the weight of the world." Michael absorbed every detail with the intensity he'd once reserved for market analysis and strategic planning. Sarah told him about Tommy's favorite foods: grilled cheese cut diagonally, chocolate milk, anything with cinnamon. His fears, loud noises, being separated from his mother, disappointment, and his dreams, becoming an engineer, having a dog, living in a house with a yard. "I've already started the legal paperwork," Michael said, showing Sarah documents that would officially make him Tommy's guardian. "My lawyers are expediting everything. The moment you're ready, Tommy will legally be my son." "He already is your son," Sarah replied softly. "The paperwork is just catching up to reality." The most difficult conversation came when Sarah asked Michael about his intentions for Tommy's future. "I need to know you're not going to try to erase me from his memory. I need to know you'll help him remember that he was loved completely from the moment he was born." "Sarah, I would never do that. You're his mother, and you'll always be his mother. I want him to carry your love with him forever." Michael's voice was thick with emotion. "But I also want him to know that he has a father who will never abandon him again." Tommy had been cautiously warming to Michael's presence, allowing small moments of connection while still processing the enormous changes in his young life. He would sometimes slip and call Michael Sir instead of Dad, then apologize with the careful politeness that broke Michael's heart. But there were breakthrough moments too, when Tommy explained how he'd learned to shine shoes so well, when he showed Michael drawings he'd made of rocket ships, when he fell asleep holding both his mother's hand and Michael's during afternoon visits. "Mr. Harrison, I mean, Dad." "No," Tommy said one afternoon, the words still feeling foreign in his mouth. "When Mama goes to heaven, will you still want to take care of me even if I make mistakes?" The question revealed the fear that had been haunting Tommy, that this newfound father might disappear as suddenly as he'd appeared, that love might be conditional on perfect behavior. "Tommy, look at me," Michael said, kneeling beside the hospital bed where his son sat between his parents. "There is nothing you could ever do that would make me stop loving you. Nothing you could say, no mistake you could make, no problem you could have that would ever make me abandon you. Do you understand that? But you left before," Tommy said with the brutal honesty of childhood. "Mama said you had to go away." Michael felt the accusation like a physical blow, because it was true and because he deserved every bit of his son's wariness. "You're absolutely right. I did leave, and that was the biggest mistake of my entire life. But Tommy, I didn't know about you then. If I had known I had a son, nothing in the world could have made me stay away. Promise?" Tommy's voice was small, uncertain. "I promise you, with everything I am and everything I have, that I will never leave you. You're stuck with me forever now." For the first time since learning Michael was his father, Tommy smiled, really smiled, with the kind of joy that transformed his entire face. "Forever is a really long time." "Not long enough," Michael replied, meaning every word. Sarah Rodriguez passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in November. With Tommy sleeping in the chair beside her bed and Michael holding her hand as her breathing gradually became peaceful and then stopped altogether. She died surrounded by love, having lived just long enough to see her son safe in his father's care. The funeral was small but profound, attended by neighbors from Sarah's apartment building, co-workers from her jobs, Tommy's teachers, and a handful of Michael's employees who had learned to respect their CEO's transformation from corporate warrior to devoted father. Tommy stood between Michael and Sarah's closest friend, Maria Santos, wearing his first suit and holding a single white rose. "She's not really gone," Tommy told Michael as they stood at the graveside. "She's just watching from somewhere we can't see her yet." Michael's heart broke and healed simultaneously as he looked down at his 8-year-old son, who was facing the greatest loss of his young life with wisdom and courage that amazed everyone around him. "That's exactly right, buddy. And she's proud of how brave you're being." "Are you sad that you didn't get to be married to her again?" Tommy asked with the directness that had become familiar to Michael. "I'm sad that I missed so many years with both of you," Michael replied honestly. "But I'm grateful that I found you, and that she got to see us become a family before she left." The transition to Michael's custody was surprisingly smooth, partly because Tommy had inherited his mother's adaptability, and partly because Michael had spent weeks learning to structure his life around his son's needs. The penthouse apartment was redesigned with a child in mind. Tommy's bedroom overlooked Central Park, a playroom was filled with books and building sets, and a study area was set up where father and son could work on homework together. But the most significant change was in Michael himself. Board meetings were scheduled around Tommy's school hours. Business dinners were replaced with help with homework and bedtime stories. The man who had once worked 18-hour days now left the office at 3 p.m. to pick up his son from school. "Mr. Harrison," said Rebecca Chen, Michael's longtime assistant, "the Tokyo office is requesting a conference call at 6 a.m. tomorrow morning. Schedule it for 9 a.m. instead. Michael replied, without looking up from the math worksheet he was checking for Tommy. And Rebecca, it's time everyone understood that my family comes first now. Always. Tommy's adjustment to his new life was remarkable, but not without challenges. He had nightmares about his mother. Moments of overwhelming grief that hit him at unexpected times, and periods of guilt about enjoying his dramatically improved circumstances. Michael handled each crisis with patience he'd never known he possessed, holding Tommy when he cried, reassuring him when he worried, and creating new traditions that honored Sarah's memory while building their future together. "Dad," Tommy said one evening as they worked together on a model airplane, "do you think Mama would be happy about us living in this big apartment?" "I think she'd be happy that you're safe and loved and have everything you need," Michael replied. "But Tommy, if you ever feel guilty about having nice things now, remember that your mama worked so hard because she wanted you to have a better life. This is what she was working toward. I miss her helping me with my homework." "I miss her too, buddy. And it's okay to miss her. It's okay to be sad sometimes. But we can help each other. And we can make sure we never forget how much she loved us both." Tommy nodded, then surprised Michael by reaching over and hugging him tightly. "I'm glad you're my dad, even if it took a really long time for us to find each other." Michael held his son close, marveling at the resilience and wisdom of this remarkable child who had already taught him more about love and priorities than he'd learned in 38 years of pursuing success. "I'm glad too, Tommy. I'm the luckiest dad in the world." 6 months after Sarah's death, Michael and Tommy had settled into a rhythm of father-son life that amazed everyone who knew them. Michael had discovered that parenting suited him in ways that business success never had. He found joy in Tommy's academic achievements, pride in his son's kindness toward others, and purpose in providing the security and opportunities that Tommy had never known before. Tommy was thriving at his new private school, where his intelligence and work ethic quickly earned respect from both teachers and classmates. But more importantly, he was learning to be a child, joining the science club, making friends, and discovering interests beyond survival and helping his family. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Tommy said one Saturday morning as they worked together in the garden of their new house in Westchester, a sprawling property with the yard and space for a dog that Tommy had always dreamed of having. "You can ask me anything, always," Michael replied, looking up from the tomato plants they were tending together. "Why didn't you and Mama get married when I was born? I mean, if you loved each other?" The question was one Michael had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. Tommy deserved the truth. But it was a truth that reflected poorly on Michael's character and priorities at the time. "Because I was young and stupid and thought that success was more important than love," Michael said honestly. "I thought having a family would slow me down, prevent me from achieving my goals. I was wrong about everything that mattered. But you're successful now, and you have me." "Exactly, and having you has made every success more meaningful and every achievement worth celebrating. I spent 17 years building a company, but you and your mama taught me what real success looks like." Tommy nodded thoughtfully, then asked the question that went to the heart of his 8-year-old understanding of the world. If you could go back and change it, would you stay with Mama instead of becoming rich? Michael set down his gardening tools and looked directly at his son. "Tommy, I would give up every dollar I have, every building with my name on it, every business deal I've ever made, to have those 8 years with you and your mother. Money can be earned again, but time with the people you love can never be replaced. But then maybe we would have been poor, and Mama might not have gotten sick. Maybe. Or maybe we would have faced different challenges, but we would have faced them together, as a family, and that would have been better than any amount of money." That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Maria Santos, Sarah's closest friend, who had maintained contact with Tommy and Michael since the funeral. She arrived with a box that she said Sarah had asked her to give to Tommy when he was settled with his father. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, each marked with a different age or milestone. Letters for when you turn 9, letters for your first day of high school, letters for when you graduate college, letters for your wedding day. She started writing these when you were 3, Maria explained to Tommy, who was holding the letters with reverent care. She wanted to make sure you would always have her guidance, no matter what happened to her. Tommy opened the first letter, marked "For when you have a father," and read it aloud with tears streaming down his face. "My dearest Tommy, if you're reading this, it means you found your daddy. And I am so happy. He's a good man who made a mistake when he was young, but people can change and grow. Be patient with him as he learns to be a father, and be patient with yourself as you learn to trust him. He will love you as much as I do, just in different ways. Remember that having a father doesn't mean you're replacing me in your heart. Hearts are big enough for all the love we can find. I am watching over both of you always." Michael found himself crying alongside his son, overwhelmed by Sarah's generosity and wisdom, even in death. She had not only forgiven him, but had helped pave the way for him to build a relationship with Tommy. "She really loved us both, didn't she?" Tommy said, looking up at Michael through his tears. "She really did," Michael confirmed. "And she made sure we would find each other and become a real family." As they sat together reading more of Sarah's letters, Michael understood that she had given him more than forgiveness. She had given him a roadmap for loving their son, a way to honor her memory while building their future together. 1 year after Tommy had first shined Michael's shoes outside Harrison Industries, father and son stood together in the executive boardroom of that same company, but everything had changed. The walls now displayed Tommy's artwork alongside corporate achievements, and the conference table had been modified with a smaller chair where Tommy could sit during the special board meeting that would change both their lives forever. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael addressed the assembled board members, "I want to announce some significant changes to Harrison Industries' structure and mission. Effective immediately, we will be establishing the Sarah Rodriguez Memorial Foundation, dedicated to providing healthcare assistance, educational support, and emergency financial aid to single-parent families." The board members, many of whom had watched Michael's transformation from ruthless CEO to devoted father with amazement, nodded their approval. Michael's leadership style had evolved dramatically over the past year, emphasizing employee well-being and corporate social responsibility in ways that had actually improved the company's performance and reputation. "Furthermore," Michael continued, "I'm announcing that Tommy Harrison will be named the Foundation's future director, with full training and preparation beginning immediately. This company will become his inheritance, but more importantly, it will become his platform for helping families like the one we used to be." Tommy, now 9 years old and carrying himself with confidence that reflected his father's influence and his mother's values, stood up to address the board with a poise that amazed the assembled executives. "My mama used to tell me that when you're lucky enough to have more than you need, you should help people who don't have enough," Tommy said, his young voice clear and strong. "My dad and I have been really lucky, and we want to use that luck to help other kids and their mamas." Indeed, the Foundation's first major initiative was a comprehensive support program for families dealing with medical crises, exactly the kind of help that might have saved Sarah if it had existed when she needed it. Michael and Tommy worked together to design programs that addressed not just financial needs, but the emotional and practical challenges of single parenthood and childhood illness. "We're going to make sure no kid has to shine shoes to help pay for their mama's medicine," Tommy explained to a reporter from the Business Journal who was interviewing them about the Foundation's launch. "And no parent has to choose between working and caring for a sick child," Michael added, looking at his son with pride that went far beyond business achievements. The most meaningful moment of the press conference came when a journalist asked Tommy what he thought his mother would say about the foundation being named in her honor. Tommy was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness he brought to everything important. "I think she would say that we found a way to turn our sad story into something that helps other people have happy endings. She always said that love doesn't end when people die. It just finds new ways to help people." After the press conference, as Michael and Tommy drove home to their house in Westchester, Tommy asked the question that had been on his mind for weeks. "Dad, do you ever regret not having other kids? Like kids who you got to raise from when they were babies?" Michael pulled the car over and turned to look at his son. "Tommy, you are the only child I ever want or need. I may have missed your first 8 years, but I plan to be there for every day of the rest of your life. You're not my consolation prize, you're my greatest achievement. Even though I came with a lot of problems and sadness, especially because of that, you taught me that real strength comes from surviving difficult things with grace and kindness. You showed me what courage looks like, what love means, and what really matters in life." Tommy smiled, the bright, transformative smile that never failed to remind Michael of both Sarah's warmth and his own determination. "I'm glad we found each other, Dad, even if it took forever." "Not forever," Michael replied, starting the car again. "Just long enough for us to be ready to appreciate what we found." 2 years after their first meeting, Michael Harrison stood before the graduating class of Tommy's elementary school, delivering a commencement address that had been requested after his and Tommy's story became nationally known through their foundation work. At 40, Michael had evolved from a corporate mogul focused solely on profit into a recognized leader in social entrepreneurship and family advocacy. "Parents, teachers, and most importantly, graduates," Michael began, looking directly at Tommy, who sat in the front row wearing his cap and gown and beaming with pride. "I want to tell you about the day my life really began. It wasn't when I started my company, or when I made my first million, or when I was featured on magazine covers. It was the day an 8-year-old boy asked me if he could shine my shoes." And the audience of families leaned forward as Michael told the story that had become both inspiration and cautionary tale. How success without love was meaningless, how second chances could transform lives, and how children often teach adults the most important lessons about character and priorities. "Tommy Harrison taught me that real wealth isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in the love you give and receive, the positive impact you have on others, and the legacy you leave for future generations." The Sarah Rodriguez Memorial Foundation has helped over 10,000 families in the past 2 years, but more importantly, it has shown us that tragedy can become triumph when we choose to use our pain to prevent others from suffering. Tommy stood to receive his diploma with grades that reflected both his natural intelligence and the confidence that came from knowing he was loved and supported. He had grown into a remarkable young man who carried his mother's kindness and his father's determination, but most importantly, he had retained the empathy and work ethic that had impressed Michael during their first encounter. After the ceremony, as families gathered for celebration photos, Tommy surprised Michael by presenting him with a gift, a framed photograph of the three of them taken during one of their last visits with Sarah, along with a letter Tommy had written. "Dear Dad," the letter read in Tommy's careful handwriting, "thank you for proving that daddies and sons can find each other even when it seems impossible. Thank you for making sure Mama's love didn't die with her, but kept growing through our foundation. Thank you for showing me that being rich in money doesn't matter unless you're also rich in family. You're the best dad any kid could ask for, and I'm proud to be your son. Love, Tommy Harrison." Michael felt tears streaming down his face as he read his son's words, overwhelmed by the realization that Tommy, who had every right to be angry about the father who hadn't been there for his early years, had instead chosen gratitude and love. "Tommy, you know what the best part of being your dad is?" Michael asked as they walked together toward their car. "What?" "Getting to watch you become the kind of man your mother dreamed you would be. She would be so proud of you." "She would be proud of you too," Tommy replied with the wisdom that continued to amaze Michael. "She always said people could change if they really wanted to." You proved her right. That evening, at the graduation celebration they hosted for Tommy's classmates and their families, Michael watched his son interact with friends who came from all different backgrounds and circumstances. Tommy had learned to navigate both privilege and responsibility with grace, understanding that his advantages came with obligations to help others. "Mr. Harrison," said one of the parents, "how do you balance running a major corporation with being so involved in Tommy's life?" "Actually," Michael replied, "I've learned that being involved in Tommy's life makes me better at everything else. He keeps me grounded, reminds me what really matters, and motivates me to build a company that reflects the values we want to pass on to the next generation." As the evening wound down and Michael tucked Tommy into bed, a ritual they had maintained even as Tommy protested he was getting too old for it, his son asked the question that had become their nightly tradition. "Dad, what was the best part of your day?" "Watching you graduate and knowing that your mom was watching too, seeing the amazing young man she raised," Michael replied. "What was the best part of your day?" "Getting to be proud of you in front of all my friends," Tommy said sleepily. "And knowing that tomorrow we get to start planning my middle school years together." Michael kissed his son goodnight, marveling at how completely this child had transformed his understanding of success, love, and what it meant to live a meaningful life. 5 years after the morning that changed everything, Michael Harrison stood in the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, addressing an audience of Fortune 500 CEOs, philanthropists, and government officials at the National Conference on Corporate Social Responsibility. But he wasn't alone at the podium. Beside him stood Tommy Harrison, now 13 years old and already recognized as one of the youngest advocates for family welfare policy in the country. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael began, 5 years ago, I thought I knew what success looked like. I measured it in stock prices, profit margins, and magazine covers. Today, I want to tell you about real success, as taught to me by my son." Tommy stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had grown up understanding both privilege and responsibility. "When I was 8 years old, I shined shoes on street corners to help my sick mother. I thought that was normal, that all kids had to work to help their families survive. I didn't know that children should get to be children." The audience was captivated as Tommy continued, his young voice carrying the authority of lived experience. "The Sarah Rodriguez Memorial Foundation has helped over 50,000 families since we started it. But the most important thing we've learned is that no child should have to choose between childhood and survival, and no parent should have to choose between working and caring for their family." Michael watched his son address some of the most powerful people in America with pride that transcended any business achievement. Tommy had grown into an extraordinary young man who carried his mother's compassion and his father's strategic thinking. But most importantly, he had never forgotten where he came from or why their work mattered. "Today, we're announcing the next phase of our mission," Michael said, taking the podium again. "Tommy will be enrolling in Harvard's early admission program next fall, where he'll study business and social policy. After graduation, he'll take over leadership of the foundation and eventually inherit Harrison Industries, not as a trust fund baby, but as someone who understands that wealth is a tool for serving others." The standing ovation that followed was thunderous, but Michael's attention was focused entirely on Tommy, who had become not just his son, but his partner in building a legacy that honored Sarah's memory while creating a better future for families everywhere. After the conference, as they walked through Central Park near the spot where Tommy had first shined Michael's shoes, father and son reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Dad, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't asked to shine your shoes that morning?" Tommy asked, throwing a tennis ball for Max, the golden retriever they'd adopted 2 years earlier. "I think somehow, some way, we would have found each other," Michael replied. "Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe it would have happened differently, but I believe your mom was watching over us both, making sure we didn't miss our chance. I dream about her sometimes," Tommy said, settling onto a park bench beside his father. "She's always smiling, and she tells me she's proud of both of us." "What do you think she's most proud of?" Tommy considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had characterized him since childhood. "I think she's proud that we learned to love each other, and that we used our love to help other people. She always said the best way to honor someone's memory is to make the world a little better because they existed." Michael put his arm around his son, looking out at the city where their story had begun with such pain and had evolved into something beautiful. "Tommy, I want you to know that every success I've achieved, every good thing that's happened since that morning we met, exists because you taught me what really matters. And I want you to know that having you as my dad has been the greatest gift of my life," Tommy replied. "Even greater than having the resources to help people, even greater than getting to go to Harvard, even greater than anything else I could ever achieve." As they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose, Michael reflected on the miraculous chain of events that had brought them together. A desperate child asking to shine shoes, a successful man learning that his greatest achievement was the son he'd never known existed, and a love story that transcended death to create a family bound by choice rather than just biology. "You know what the most amazing part of our story is?" Michael said as they gathered their things to head home. "What?" "Your mom raised you to be exactly the kind of person who would save a lost soul like me. She gave you all the tools you needed to transform not just your own life, but mine too. She may not be here physically, but her love is the foundation of everything we've built together." Tommy smiled, the radiant smile that never failed to remind Michael of both Sarah's warmth and the miracle of second chances. "Then let's keep building, Dad. Let's make sure other kids get the happy endings we found." As they walked home together, the CEO who had learned that love was the ultimate success metric and the son who had taught him that lesson both understood that their story was far from over. It was simply the beginning of a legacy that would honor the past while creating hope for the future, proving that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that find each other against all odds and choose to transform their pain into purpose. The little boy who had once asked to shine shoes to help his dying mother had become a young man destined to change the world. And the father who had been too focused on success to recognize love when he first found it had learned that his greatest achievement would always be the family he'd been blessed to discover, even if it took 17 years and a chance encounter on a Manhattan street corner to make it happen.